The young marketing director made me fetch her coffee, calling me the old intern in front of clients. She'd assign me bathroom cleaning duties while her actual assistants got promotions. At the quarterly meeting, she announced I was being restructured out. I stood up, walked to the projector, and showed everyone what I'd really been working on. "Lillian, would you mind grabbing me a latte? Make sure it's oat milk. I'm lactose intolerant." Brooklyn's voice carried across the conference room like nails on a chalkboard, interrupting the client presentation I'd been developing for 3 weeks. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, including those of our biggest pharmaceutical client, as she gestured dismissively in my direction. "Our intern here doesn't mind helping out." The word intern hit me like a physical slap. I'd been in marketing for 23 years, had launched campaigns that generated millions in revenue, and held certifications Brooklyn probably couldn't even pronounce. Yet here I sat, being introduced to clients as office help while she took credit for strategies I'd crafted from scratch. "Of course," I managed, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. The client, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I could feel her confusion radiating across the polished conference table as I stood to leave the room where I should have been presenting my own work. "Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that age and experience deserve respect in the workplace, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds." This wasn't the first time, and deep down I knew it wouldn't be the last. The coffee shop downstairs buzzed with the usual morning crowd, and I found myself standing in line, wondering how I'd gotten here. 3 months ago, I'd walked into Morrison & Associates with my head held high, excited to bring my expertise to a growing firm. The hiring manager, Janet, had been thrilled with my portfolio. "Your experience with integrated campaigns is exactly what we need," she'd said, shaking my hand warmly. "Brooklyn will be lucky to have someone like you on her team." Lucky. The irony wasn't lost on me now as I ordered Brooklyn's complicated latte, watching the barista roll her eyes at the specific instructions I'd been given. When I returned to the conference room, Brooklyn was already deep into my presentation, the one I'd stayed late perfecting, complete with market research I'd gathered personally. She didn't even glance my way as I set her coffee down, too busy explaining her innovative approach to targeting demographics. "Brilliant work, Brooklyn," the client said, nodding approvingly. "Your insights into the 50-plus market are particularly impressive." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. Those insights came from my own experience, my own demographic research, my own understanding of what motivated women like me. Brooklyn had simply copied and pasted my analysis into her slide deck, adding her name to the header. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. First came the coffee runs. Always during important meetings, always with complicated orders that took just long enough to make me miss crucial discussions. Then the introductions began changing. In week 1, I was Lillian, our new marketing specialist. By week 3, I'd become Lillian, who helps us out with various projects. By month 2, I was simply our intern. The bathroom incident happened on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was reviewing campaign metrics when Brooklyn appeared at my desk, her signature fake smile plastered across her face. "Lillian, the executive restroom needs attention. The cleaning crew missed it yesterday." She placed a basket of supplies next to my keyboard with deliberate care. "You've got experience cleaning up messes, right?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Around us, conversations stopped. Sarah, one of Brooklyn's assistants, suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. Marcus from the creative team cleared his throat and walked away quickly. Everyone knew what was happening, but no one dared intervene. I stared at the basket, rubber gloves, disinfectant, toilet bowl cleaner, and felt something crack inside my chest. This wasn't about cleanliness or helping out. This was about power, about putting me in my place, about making sure everyone knew exactly where I stood in Brooklyn's hierarchy. "Of course," I said again, the same phrase that had become my default response to her increasingly ridiculous demands. But this time as I picked up the basket I made a mental note. Date, time, witnesses present. This was going too far, and somewhere in the back of my mind a plan began forming. The bathroom was pristine. Clearly the cleaning crew hadn't missed anything. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, scrubbing toilets that didn't need scrubbing, I thought about my daughter. Jessica worked as a software engineer in Seattle, commanding respect from colleagues half her age. What would she think if she could see me now? The woman who'd raised her to never let anyone diminish her worth was literally on her knees in an office bathroom, cleaning up messes that didn't exist. When I returned to my desk 40 minutes later, Brooklyn was holding court near the water cooler, regaling her assistants with stories about social media trends. Some people just can't adapt, she was saying loud enough for me to hear. They're stuck in the past thinking newspaper ads and radio spots still matter. It's actually kind of sad. Her assistant Emma giggled nervously. But experience counts for something, right? Brooklyn's laugh was sharp, cutting. Experience with outdated methods isn't really experience at all. It's more like institutional memory. Nice to have around for context, but not particularly useful for actual strategy. I settled back into my chair, my hands still smelling faintly of disinfectant despite thorough washing. Institutional memory. That's what 23 years of successful campaigns had been reduced to in Brooklyn's world. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not campaign copy or market analysis, but something else entirely. A document I titled Timeline of Events. Date, time, incident, witnesses present. The supply closet assignment came 3 weeks later, perfectly timed to coincide with the quarterly strategy session I'd been preparing for months. Brooklyn appeared at my desk with another fake smile, this one even more transparent than usual. Lillian, I need you to organize the supply closet today. It's a disaster and we have executives coming through next week. She paused, tilting her head with mock concern. I know you were planning to sit in on the strategy meeting, but honestly your time is better spent on practical tasks. The meeting will be pretty technical. Lots of digital analytics and platform optimization. Probably over your head anyway. The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. Behind Brooklyn, I could see the conference room where my colleagues were gathering for the meeting I'd helped plan. Charts and graphs I'd created covered the walls. Strategies I'd developed filled the agenda. And I was being sent to organize office supplies like a receptionist from 1985. What about the Morrison account presentation? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. I've been developing that campaign for 6 weeks. Brooklyn's smile widened. Oh, don't worry about that. Emma pulled together some fresh ideas yesterday. Much more contemporary approach. You understand. I understood perfectly. Emma, fresh out of college with a marketing degree and zero real-world experience, had probably spent an hour repackaging my work with trendier language and brighter colors. She'd get the credit, the presentation, and probably the promotion that should have been mine. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 47 minutes, watching Brooklyn's BMW disappear into traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel the full weight of what was happening to me. This wasn't just workplace politics or personality conflicts. This was systematic, deliberate, and designed to push me out. Through my windshield, I could see lights still on in the building, probably the cleaning crew finishing their work. The real cleaning crew, the one that actually kept the office spotless without being asked to humiliate fellow employees. I thought about calling Jessica, about pouring out my frustrations to someone who would understand. But what would I say? That I was being treated like an intern despite 2 decades of experience? That I was cleaning bathrooms while someone half my age stole my work? The shame burned hotter than the anger because part of me wondered if Brooklyn was right. Maybe I was outdated, maybe my experience didn't matter in this new world of instant everything and algorithmic marketing. Maybe I should just accept the early retirement package that seemed inevitable, take my pension and fade quietly into irrelevance. But as I finally started my engine and pulled out of the parking lot, passing the building where my career was being systematically dismantled, I made a decision. Brooklyn wanted to play games with my professional reputation? She wanted to treat me like some relic from a bygone era? Fine. Let her underestimate exactly what this old intern was capable of. After all, she'd made one crucial mistake in her campaign against me. She'd assumed that someone with my experience hadn't learned a few things about strategy, documentation, and the art of war along the way. The next morning, I arrived at the office 30 minutes early, armed with a leather-bound notebook I'd picked up from the bookstore on my way home. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few early birds like myself who preferred the quiet hours before the chaos began. I sat in my car for a moment, running my fingers over the smooth cover of what would become my secret weapon. Inside, I'd already written 3 entries from memory: the coffee incident, the bathroom assignment, and the supply closet humiliation. Each entry included the date, time, location, witnesses present, and Brooklyn's exact words when I could remember them. What surprised me was how easily the details came flooding back, as if my mind had been unconsciously cataloging every slight, every dismissive comment, every calculated insult. My first real break came during the Tuesday morning team meeting, when Brooklyn decided to share her thoughts about our new social media strategy. She was explaining something about authentic engagement when her phone buzzed with a text message. Without missing a beat, she glanced at it and smirked. "Speaking of authentic," she said, looking directly at me with that familiar cruel smile, "we need to make sure our content doesn't scream retirement home brochure. Our demographic research shows clients respond better to fresh, youthful perspectives. No offense, Lillian, but your generation's idea of cutting edge stopped somewhere around Facebook's early days." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Marcus shifted in his chair. Emma suddenly found her coffee cup fascinating. But I just smiled and nodded, my hand casually resting on my phone where the voice memo app was already recording. Brooklyn had no idea she'd just handed me golden evidence, complete with witnesses and a timestamp. "None taken," I replied calmly. Though I should mention I was actually developing integrated social campaigns when most of our team was still in middle school. Brooklyn's smile twitched, but she pressed on. "Experience with outdated platforms isn't really the same thing, though. We need people who understand TikTok psychology, Instagram algorithms, the whole ecosystem. It's probably best if you focus on more traditional tasks while we handle the digital innovation." I nodded again, still recording, still smiling. Each word was another nail in her professional coffin, though she was too arrogant to realize it. After the meeting, I transferred the audio file to my secure cloud storage and transcribed every word into my notebook. The pattern was becoming clearer with each documented incident. Brooklyn wasn't just being mean, she was systematically building a case for my irrelevance, creating a paper trail that would justify my eventual termination. But two could play that game. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, when Sarah appeared at my desk after most of the office had cleared out for the day. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if Brooklyn might materialize from the shadows. "Can I talk to you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. I minimized my computer screen. I'd been reviewing email threads where Brooklyn had reassigned my projects, and gave Sarah my full attention. At 26, she reminded me of my daughter, fresh-faced and idealistic, still believing that hard work and talent would naturally lead to success. "I need to tell you something," she continued, perching on the edge of my guest chair like she might need to make a quick escape. "About what Brooklyn said about you in the staff meeting last week." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of things?" Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "She told us, me and Emma and the other assistants, that you were basically just filling time until you figured out your next step. She said not to give you anything important because you might, well, she said you might mess things up because you're not really focused on the job." The words hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd suspected something like this was happening. Hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow to my chest. "She also said," Sarah continued, her voice getting smaller, "that clients prefer working with younger faces, and that we should gradually take over your client interactions. She made it sound like it was for your own good, like she was protecting you from embarrassing situations." I reached for my notebook, hands steady despite the anger burning in my veins. "Sarah, would you be willing to write this down? Officially, I mean." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her features. "I've been feeling awful about it for weeks. It's not right what she's doing to you. You're one of the best people here and everyone knows it except her." As Sarah wrote her statement in careful, precise handwriting, I realized Brooklyn had made a crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that younger employees would automatically side with her, that they'd see me as dead weight worth discarding. Instead, her treatment of me had made them uncomfortable, had awakened their sense of fairness and justice. Emma approached me 2 days later with her own story. Brooklyn had explicitly told her to keep Lillian busy with administrative tasks, while the real marketing work went to others. She'd even suggested that I was getting confused by new technology and needed simpler assignments to avoid mistakes. "I have the email where she wrote all this," Emma said, forwarding it to me immediately. "I saved it because something felt wrong about the whole thing." Reading Brooklyn's casual cruelty in black and white was both infuriating and vindicating. She'd been sloppy, leaving digital footprints everywhere, apparently believing that no one would ever challenge her authority or question her decisions. But the real goldmine came when I started reaching out to former employees. Finding Margaret took some detective work. She'd scrubbed her LinkedIn profile and wasn't listed in any company directories. I finally tracked her down through a mutual connection in the industry who remembered her fondly. "Margaret Chin," she said when I called. "Oh my goodness, I wondered what happened to her. She just disappeared one day. Very mysterious." When I finally reached Margaret herself, the conversation began tentatively but quickly turned emotional. She'd been with the company for nearly 20 years, a dedicated financial analyst who'd won multiple performance awards. Then Brooklyn arrived, and suddenly Margaret was making computational errors and showing resistance to new methodologies. "I kept wondering if I was losing my mind," Margaret said, her voice thick with remembered pain. "Everything I did was suddenly wrong. Every report needed revision. Every analysis was outdated. I started doubting myself, wondering if I really had become obsolete." She'd kept documentation too. Performance reviews that contradicted years of exemplary evaluations, emails where Brooklyn questioned her competence, meeting notes where her contributions were dismissed as traditional thinking. When I asked if she'd consider supporting a discrimination case, she was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I was the only one," she finally whispered. "I thought it was just me, that maybe I really wasn't good enough anymore." Paul's story was similar but more heartbreaking. A creative director with 15 years at the company, he'd watched his ideas get reassigned to younger team members while he was relegated to proofreading and file organization. Brooklyn had documented a pattern of creative stagnation and resistance to contemporary design trends that bore no resemblance to the innovative campaigns he'd been producing for over a decade. "She made me feel like a dinosaur," he said during our phone call. "Like everything I knew about design and branding was worthless. I started believing it myself." With their statements added to my growing file, I realized I wasn't dealing with isolated incidents of workplace bullying. This was systematic age discrimination, carefully orchestrated and meticulously documented by Brooklyn herself. She'd created a paper trail of manufactured incompetence to justify pushing out experienced employees. My final step was reaching out to Elizabeth Morrison, a lawyer who specialized in employment discrimination. Her receptionist scheduled a consultation for the following week, but Elizabeth called me personally that evening after reviewing the preliminary materials I'd sent. "This isn't just discrimination," she said without preamble. "This is systematic harassment designed to force older employees out of the company. How many others do you think there might be?" That question haunted me as I hung up the phone. How many others had Brooklyn driven away? How many experienced professionals had left believing they were truly inadequate, never realizing they'd been targeted for elimination? For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not just for justice but for vindication. Brooklyn's arrogance had been her downfall. She documented her own discrimination so thoroughly that building a case against her would be like connecting dots in a children's coloring book. The predator had become the prey, and she didn't even know it yet. The EOC office smelled like stale coffee and bureaucratic resignation. I sat in the waiting room, clutching my manila folder filled with months of carefully documented evidence, watching other people navigate their own workplace nightmares. A woman about my age sat across from me, her hands shaking as she filled out forms. A younger man paced near the window, muttering quietly into his phone about overtime violations. When my name was called, I followed a tired-looking caseworker down a hallway lined with motivational posters about workplace rights. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, filing a discrimination complaint while Brooklyn was probably back at the office, blissfully unaware that her world was about to implode. "Mrs. Patterson," the caseworker said, settling behind her desk with my file. "I've reviewed your preliminary submission. This appears to be a textbook case of age discrimination with a pattern of systematic harassment." Her words should have felt validating, but instead they made my stomach clench. This was really happening. I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, filing an official complaint that would set forces in motion I couldn't control. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll investigate, interview witnesses, review documentation. The process typically takes several months. He paused, studying my face. Are you prepared for potential retaliation? Employers sometimes escalate hostile behavior once they know a complaint has been filed. I almost laughed. Ma'am, the retaliation started months ago. At this point, I'm just making it official. That evening, Elizabeth Morrison called with an update on the parallel lawsuit we were preparing. Her voice carried the kind of controlled excitement that lawyers get when they know they have an airtight case. I've never seen documentation this thorough, she said. Brooklyn essentially built our case for us. But we need to discuss timing. When do you want to serve the papers? The question hung in the air while I considered my options. I could go quietly, settle privately, take whatever severance they offered and disappear into early retirement. That's what they expected, what they were counting on. Older employees were supposed to fade gracefully, not fight back publicly. I want maximum impact, I told her. Not just for me but for everyone she's driven out before. What did you have in mind? That's when inspiration struck. I'd been thinking about this all wrong, approaching it like a traditional legal matter when what I really needed was a marketing campaign. And I knew exactly the right venue for my product launch. The next day I cornered Sarah during her lunch break. She was sitting alone in the break room, scrolling through her phone while picking at a salad that looked more like punishment than food. Sarah, can I ask you something about company procedures? I said, sliding into the seat across from her. She looked up nervously, probably wondering if Brooklyn had sent me to spy on her. Sure, what's up? The quarterly meetings, they're pretty formal affairs, right? Leadership presentations, client updates, that sort of thing. Oh yeah, they're huge productions. Brooklyn always treats them like her personal TED Talk. Sarah rolled her eyes. She spends weeks preparing her presentation, making sure everything's perfect. The whole thing gets live-streamed to the satellite offices and recorded for the company archive. My heart started racing. Live-streamed to whom exactly? Everyone. All the regional managers, legal department, HR leadership, even some of our bigger clients who want to stay informed about company direction. She took a bite of lettuce, completely unaware she'd just handed me the keys to Brooklyn's professional destruction. Why do you ask? Just curious about company culture, I said casually. When's the next one? 3 weeks from Friday. Brooklyn's already in full preparation mode. You know how she gets. I certainly did know how she got. Obsessive, controlling, desperate to impress. She'd spend the next 3 weeks perfecting her presentation, polishing her image, making sure every detail reflected her vision of leadership excellence. She'd never suspect that someone she considered beneath notice was planning to hijack her moment of glory. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Elizabeth's number in my phone and a calendar spread before me. The quarterly meeting was October 15th. If I filed the lawsuit on October 14th, I'd have the confirmation letter in hand by the next morning. Perfect timing for a little Chantal. Elizabeth, it's Lillian. I know when I want to serve those papers. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of preparation that would have impressed any military strategist. I practiced my presentation in front of my bathroom mirror, timing each slide transition, perfecting my tone of voice. The folder containing all my evidence was organized with surgical precision. Each document labeled, each statement arranged in chronological order, each piece of proof designed for maximum impact. My outfit required careful consideration. Too casual and I'd look unprofessional. Too formal and I'd seem like I was trying too hard. I settled on the navy blazer I'd worn when I won the Industry Achievement Award 5 years ago. Professional, confident, memorable. The kind of outfit that commanded attention and respect. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected source. While researching our client list for potential witnesses, I discovered that one of our biggest accounts was Silverbridge Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to senior citizens' rights and age discrimination advocacy. They'd been with the company for 3 years, representing nearly $800,000 in annual revenue. The irony was delicious. Brooklyn had been systematically discriminating against older employees while taking money from an organization dedicated to protecting exactly those people. I wondered if anyone else had noticed this contradiction, or if Brooklyn was too arrogant to see the conflict. I called Silverbridge's executive director, Dr. Patricia Vance, and introduced myself as a Morrison & Associates employee with concerns about company practices. The conversation that followed was one of the most satisfying 20 minutes of my life. Age discrimination? Dr. Vance's voice sharpened immediately. At Morrison and Associates? Are you certain? I'm filing an EOC complaint and a federal lawsuit, I told her. I have documentation, witness statements, and a pattern of systematic harassment targeting employees over 50. The silence stretched so long I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, Dr. Vance spoke, her voice cold as winter steel. Ms. Patterson, Silverbridge Foundation cannot and will not maintain business relationships with organizations that engage in age discrimination. We'll be freezing our contract renewal immediately pending a full investigation. When was that contract supposed to be renewed? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Next week, actually. We were planning to announce a 3-year extension at your quarterly meeting. Brooklyn Morrison specifically requested that we make the announcement during her presentation. Perfect. Brooklyn was expecting a triumphant moment where she'd announce a major contract extension, cement her reputation as a client relations genius, and bask in the admiration of company leadership. Instead, she'd be blindsided by the news that her biggest client had walked away because of her own discriminatory behavior. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision. The lawsuit would be filed Thursday, giving me the official paperwork by Friday morning. Silverbridge would notify the company of their contract freeze Thursday evening, timing it so Brooklyn wouldn't find out until she was already in front of the cameras. And I'd be sitting in that conference room with a folder full of evidence, ready to turn her moment of glory into a public reckoning. That Thursday night I barely slept. Tomorrow would either vindicate months of careful planning or expose me as a vindictive employee making wild accusations. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to rain tap against my windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Brooklyn had spent so much time underestimating me, dismissing my experience and competence, that she'd never considered I might be capable of strategic thinking. She saw an aging woman clinging to relevance, not a seasoned professional with decades of experience in planning campaigns, managing timelines, and executing complex strategies. Tomorrow she'd learn the difference between age and wisdom. And the lesson would be delivered in front of everyone who mattered to her career. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that promised change. I stood in my bedroom, fingering the fabric of my navy blazer, the same one I'd worn to accept the Excellence in Marketing Innovation Award 3 years ago. Back then, I'd felt invincible standing on that stage while industry leaders applauded my campaign that had revolutionized senior market targeting. Today the blazer felt like battle armor, each button a small act of defiance. The drive to the office was surreal. Every red light, every turn felt significant, as if the universe was giving me one last chance to change my mind. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. Paperwork filed. Confirmation in your email. Good luck today. I pulled into the parking lot and sat for a moment, watching Brooklyn's BMW gleaming in its reserved spot near the entrance. The quarterly meeting was scheduled for 10:30, but I arrived at 8 to prepare. The conference room buzzed with IT technicians setting up the livestream equipment, adjusting cameras and testing audio levels. I watched them work, knowing that in a few hours, this ordinary conference room would become the stage for Brooklyn's professional destruction. Big day today, Marcus said, passing by with his coffee. Brooklyn's been hyping this presentation for weeks. Something about major announcements and strategic partnerships. I managed a smile. Should be memorable. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every email notification made my heart jump. Every footstep in the hallway could be someone coming to tell me the plan had fallen apart. But at 10:15 I received the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Dr. Vance had officially notified company leadership that Silverbridge Foundation was freezing their contract pending investigation of discrimination allegations. Brooklyn would walk into that meeting expecting to announce a 3-year contract extension worth nearly $1 million. Instead, she'd learn that her biggest client had abandoned ship because of her own behavior. The conference room filled gradually. Regional managers appeared on the wall-mounted screens, their faces pixelated but attentive. HR Director Janet Sullivan settled into her usual front-row seat, tablet ready for note-taking. Legal counsel Robert Chin sat nearby, looking bored and checking his watch. Neither of them had any idea what was about to unfold. Brooklyn made her entrance at exactly 10:28, because she'd calculated that arriving 2 minutes before start time projected confidence without appearing rushed. She wore her signature red blazer, the one she claimed made her look executive-ready, and carried herself with the swagger of someone who owned the room. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice carrying that artificially sweet tone I'd learned to despise. "Before we dive into our quarterly updates, I have some housekeeping to address." My stomach clenched. This wasn't how I'd expected her to start. Brooklyn smiled that predatory smile and gestured vaguely in my direction. "As you all know, we've been evaluating our team structure to ensure optimal efficiency and relevance in today's rapidly evolving market landscape." The corporate speak was thick enough to choke on, but I recognized the setup. She was positioning my termination as a strategic business decision rather than what it really was: targeted harassment. "After careful consideration, we've decided to restructure Lillian's position." She made air quotes around the word restructure as if the euphemism was some kind of inside joke. "Lillian's been such a learning experience for all of us, and we think it's time for her to explore opportunities that better match her, shall we say, traditional skill set." A few people chuckled nervously. Sarah stared at her hands. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The silence that followed felt heavy and awkward, filled with the kind of tension that comes when everyone knows something wrong is happening but no one wants to be the one to say it. Brooklyn basked in the discomfort for a moment before continuing. "We're confident this decision will allow us to bring in fresh talent with contemporary perspectives that align with our forward-thinking approach." That was my cue. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way I'd practiced in my living room mirror. The room fell completely silent. Even the whispered conversations from the remote participants seemed to stop. Every eye in the room focused on me as I walked to the front, my folder clutched in steady hands. Brooklyn's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion as I approached the projector setup. "Lillian, what are you doing? This isn't really the time for..." I ignored her, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the presentation system. The legal documents in my folder rustled as I distributed copies to Janet Sullivan, Robert Chin, and CO David Morrison, who just arrived and was taking his seat at the head of the table. "What is this?" Brooklyn asked, her voice climbing an octave. The confidence was already beginning to crack. I turned to face the room, my hands surprisingly steady as I navigated to my first slide. On screens across 3 states, my carefully prepared presentation replaced Brooklyn's corporate logo. "Slide 1, I said calmly. "UC complaint confirmation, filed yesterday against Morrison and Associates for systematic age discrimination." The words hit the room like a physical force. Brooklyn's mouth fell open. Janet Sullivan leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the document I'd handed her. David Morrison's face went completely pale as he realized what was happening. "Slide 2. Documented evidence of discriminatory comments and harassment, including audio recordings and witness statements." Brooklyn tried to interrupt. "This is completely inappropriate, you can't just..." "Slide 3, I continued, my voice cutting through her protests. "Company handbook violations with specific policy citations." Each click of my presentation remote felt like firing a cannon. The room was so quiet I could hear the humming of the air conditioning, the soft whir of the cameras capturing everything for the company archive. "Slide 4. Statements from former employees Margaret Chin and Paul Rodriguez, both over 50, both forced out under similar circumstances." Brooklyn finally found her voice. "This is highly inappropriate behavior during a professional meeting." "So is age discrimination," I replied, my voice steady and clear. For once, Brooklyn had no witty comeback, no dismissive gesture, no microphone to hide behind. "Slide 5, I said, advancing to my final slide. "Contract freeze notification from Silverbridge Foundation, effective immediately, pending investigation of discrimination allegations." The impact was instantaneous and devastating. David Morrison's face shifted from pale to gray as he processed the financial implications. Brooklyn's carefully constructed world crumbled in real time as she realized her moment of triumph had become her professional execution. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. "Silverbridge is announcing their contract extension today. We have a 3-year deal worth..." I corrected. Past tense. Dr. Vance called yesterday to inform the company that they cannot maintain business relationships with organizations that engage in age discrimination. Brooklyn's face cycled through 3 different shades of red in 30 seconds. She looked frantically around the room, seeking support, allies, anyone who might rescue her from this nightmare. But the colleagues who'd laughed at her jokes about my age now stared at their laptops, suddenly fascinated by their screens. "This is a setup," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is vindictive and unprofessional and documented," I finished. "Every incident, every comment, every email. All admissible in court." Robert Chin cleared his throat and leaned toward David Morrison. "We need to suspend this meeting immediately and convene emergency legal review." But the damage was already done. Brooklyn Morrison, the woman who'd spent months systematically destroying my professional dignity, sat slumped in her chair like a deflated balloon. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked exactly what she was: small, powerless, and completely outmaneuvered by someone she'd consistently underestimated. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd imagined. The silence that followed my presentation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the quiet of a library or the hush of a church. It was the profound stillness that comes when the world shifts on its axis and everyone in the room realizes they've just witnessed something irreversible. David Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he set down the Silverbridge contract freeze letter. The paper seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in his grip, each word representing not just lost revenue but a complete failure of leadership oversight. His eyes moved from the document to Brooklyn, then to me, then back to the document, as if he couldn't quite process how his Friday morning had transformed into a corporate nightmare. "Security," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the humming of the livestream equipment that was still broadcasting our corporate meltdown to offices across 3 states. "Please escort Ms. Morrison to her office to collect her personal items." Brooklyn's head snapped up like she'd been slapped. "David, you can't seriously be. This is a misunderstanding, a vindictive employee making false accusations." "The recording devices captured everything, Brooklyn." Janet Sullivan's voice cut through the room with surgical precision. "Including your comments about clients preferring younger faces and your instructions to keep older employees busy with tasks that wouldn't mess anything up." The color drained from Brooklyn's face as she realized the full scope of her exposure. Every meeting she'd dominated, every dismissive comment she'd made, every age-related joke she'd shared. All of it had been documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. Robert Chin closed his laptop with a decisive snap. "We need immediate damage control. Legal review of all terminations in the past 18 months, particularly employees over 45. Full audit of management practices. And someone needs to call our insurance carrier about potential liability exposure." As the security guard approached Brooklyn's chair, she made one last desperate attempt to salvage her dignity. "This is absurd. I built this department from nothing. My performance metrics speak for themselves. One disgruntled employee with a grudge can't undo years of successful leadership." "Your successful leadership just cost us nearly $1 million in annual revenue," David Morrison interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your successful leadership has exposed us to federal discrimination charges. Your successful leadership is about to become front-page news in every industry publication that covers employment law." Brooklyn stood slowly, her red blazer no longer projecting power but making her look like a cardinal caught in a hunter's trap. As she gathered her purse, her eyes met mine for a split second. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in her before: fear. Not fear of losing her job, but fear of being exposed as exactly what she was: a workplace bully whose cruelty had finally caught up with her. The security guard waited patiently as she walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the conference room floor with a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. Just before she reached the threshold, she turned back one final time. "This isn't over, Lillian," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she knew it was over. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and suddenly the room could breathe again. The executives on the video screens began talking in hushed tones, probably calculating how this disaster would affect their own regional offices. IT technicians started disconnecting equipment, eager to escape the corporate carnage they'd inadvertently broadcast. Janet Sullivan approached my seat with a manila folder tucked under her arm. "Lillian, we need to discuss next steps. Given the circumstances, we're placing you on administrative leave with full pay while we conduct our internal investigation." I nodded, understanding the corporate dance that had to be performed. They needed time to assess the damage, craft their response, and figure out how to minimize their legal exposure. We'll also be preparing a severance package, she continued, along with a formal letter of apology from the company for the treatment you endured. What kind of severance package? I asked, though I already suspected what was coming. Generous compensation, extended healthcare benefits, positive employment references. She paused, studying my face carefully. In exchange for a non-disclosure agreement regarding the events that led to your departure. There was the corporate equivalent of hush money, wrapped in professional language and tied with a bow made of legal protections. They wanted to pay me to disappear quietly, to take their money and never speak publicly about what Brooklyn had done or how the company had enabled her behavior. I'll need to review any offer with my attorney, I said, which was polite corporate speak for absolutely not. Janet's expression shifted slightly, like she'd been expecting easy compliance and was recalibrating her approach. Of course. Take all the time you need. I think you'll find our offer quite reasonable. But reasonable wasn't what I was after. Justice was. Over the next week, the corporate fallout spread like wildfire through gasoline-soaked kindling. David Morrison called an emergency board meeting. The legal department worked overtime preparing damage assessments. HR launched what they euphemistically called a culture review, but what everyone knew was a desperate search for other potential liability time bombs. The most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. Linda Martinez from operations appeared at my door the following Tuesday evening, her face pale but determined. I heard what you did, she said without preamble. About Brooklyn, I mean. About standing up to her. Linda was 53, a 20-year company veteran who'd been quietly watching her responsibilities get reassigned to younger colleagues over the past year. She'd endured Brooklyn's jokes about digital natives, and suggestions that maybe she'd be more comfortable in a less demanding role. I've been documenting everything, she continued, pulling out a notebook remarkably similar to mine. Dates, times, witnesses. I thought I was going crazy, thought maybe I really was too old to keep up. But seeing you stand up in that meeting, seeing Brooklyn's face when you showed those slides, I realized I wasn't imagining things. By Thursday, Linda's testimony had been added to Elizabeth Morrison's expanding case file. By the following Monday, Janet Williams from sales had contacted my attorney with her own documentation of age-related harassment. Both women were over 50. Both had impeccable performance records. Both had been systematically marginalized by Brooklyn's modernization initiatives. The individual lawsuit I'd filed was transforming into something larger, more significant. 3 women, 3 decades of combined experience, 3 parallel stories of discrimination that painted a picture of systematic harassment too clear to deny or dismiss. Brooklyn's professional demise accelerated with stunning speed. Industry publications picked up the story within a week, framing it as a cautionary tale about workplace discrimination in the modern economy. Her LinkedIn profile, once filled with corporate buzzwords and leadership platitudes, went dark completely. Former colleagues reached out through intermediaries to distance themselves from her methods, suddenly remembering concerns they'd never voiced when she held power over their careers. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Brooklyn, who'd built her career on staying ahead of trends and managing corporate image, had become the poster child for everything wrong with modern workplace culture. Her name became synonymous with age discrimination in professional circles, a cautionary tale shared in HR training sessions and whispered about in executive break rooms. The silence that followed my presentation had been profound, but the silence surrounding Brooklyn's professional exile was even more complete. In an industry built on networking and reputation, she'd become radioactive overnight. Nobody wanted to be associated with the marketing director who'd cost her company $1 million client and triggered a federal discrimination investigation. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply watching someone's carefully constructed world collapse under the weight of their own actions, while everyone who once enabled them suddenly develops selective amnesia about ever knowing them at all. 3 months after rejecting Morrison & Associates' severance offer, I signed the lease on a small office space in downtown's Arts District. The building was a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and windows that let in rivers of natural light, nothing like the sterile corporate environment I'd left behind. As I hung my marketing certifications on the wall next to my new business license, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. genuine excitement about going to work. Patterson Professional Consulting wasn't born from a grand business plan or market research. It emerged from necessity, from the dozens of phone calls that started flooding in after word of my stand against Brooklyn spread through professional networks. Women I'd never met were reaching out, sharing stories that felt like echoes of my own experience. The first call came from Patricia, a 54-year-old finance director in Chicago whose new manager had started questioning her adaptability to modern accounting software, despite her 20 years of flawless performance. She'd read about my case in an industry newsletter and wanted to know if I thought she was overreacting. "I keep wondering if I'm being paranoid," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Maybe I really am falling behind. Maybe he's right about my technical skills." Listening to her doubt herself, the same self-doubt Brooklyn had tried to plant in me, I realized my fight hadn't ended with that conference room presentation. It had just begun. "Patricia, when did this questioning of your skills start?" I asked, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "Right after my 54th birthday. He made a joke about it at the office party, said something about hoping I wasn't planning to retire anytime soon because training replacements was such a hassle." I started writing. Date, context, witnesses present. The same methodical documentation that had saved my career could save hers too. Within 6 weeks, I had 12 clients across 4 states. Each consultation began the same way, with a woman questioning her own competence, wondering if age had somehow diminished her professional value overnight. Each session ended with a detailed action plan, documentation strategies, legal resource contacts, and most importantly, a restored sense of personal worth. My breakthrough case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Susan Walsh, a renowned pediatric surgeon in Boston, contacted me about what she called a delicate situation at her hospital. At 57, she was being pressured to reduce her surgical schedule because younger doctors questioned whether her reflexes and stamina could handle complex procedures. "They're not saying I'm incompetent," she explained during our video consultation. "They're just suggesting I might be more comfortable in an advisory role. Less demanding, they say. More appropriate for someone at my stage of life." The language was different, but the pattern was identical. Systematic marginalization disguised as concern for the victim's well-being. Age discrimination wrapped in caring language and presented as professional development. Working with Dr. Walsh taught me something crucial about fighting these battles. Documentation was important, but understanding the psychology behind age discrimination was equally valuable. Managers like Brooklyn didn't wake up one morning deciding to target older employees. They were responding to deep-seated cultural biases about aging and relevance, biases that made their discrimination feel justified rather than cruel. 6 months into running my consulting practice, I received a call that made my chest tight with mixed emotions. Linda Martinez, my former colleague who joined the lawsuit against Morrison and Associates, was crying too hard to speak clearly at first. "Lillian, you need to see this," she finally managed. "The settlement. It's not just money. They're implementing actual policy changes. Mandatory bias training for all managers. New oversight procedures for performance reviews. An ombudsman specifically for age discrimination complaints." The settlement had taken 8 months to negotiate, but Elizabeth Morrison had extracted more than financial compensation. She'd forced Morrison and Associates to acknowledge systematic problems and implement structural changes to prevent future discrimination. Brooklyn's replacement had been chosen specifically for her track record of inclusive management, and she'd already reversed several of Brooklyn's modernization decisions. 3 women who were about to be forced out have been reinstated, Linda continued, with back pay and formal apologies. And get this, they've hired 2 new consultants, both over 50, to help rebuild the department's institutional knowledge. Institutional knowledge. The same phrase Brooklyn had used dismissively was now recognized as valuable corporate asset worth protecting and leveraging. But perhaps the most satisfying update came through an entirely different channel. Marcus, my former colleague from the creative department, invited me for coffee 6 months after my dramatic exit. We met at a trendy cafe downtown, the kind of place Brooklyn would have loved. Exposed Edison bulbs, reclaimed wood tables, baristas with carefully cultivated stubble. "I have to tell you something," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his espresso with nervous energy. "About Brooklyn." I waited, not sure I wanted to hear whatever was coming next. "She's working freelance now. Small clients, mostly startups that can't afford established agencies. I saw her at Starbucks last week, laptop open, working alone. He paused, studying my face for a reaction. She looked diminished, like someone who'd lost something essential and couldn't figure out how to get it back. I waited for the surge of satisfaction, the vindictive pleasure that should accompany news of your former tormentor's professional decline. Instead, I felt something unexpected, a quiet sense of completion, like a book closing after the final chapter. How do you feel about that? Marcus asked, clearly expecting some form of celebration. Settled, I said, surprising myself with the word. Like the universe found its balance again. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels necessary, like gravity or sunrise. Natural consequences following inevitable laws. These days, I drive past the Morrison and Associates building occasionally, usually when I'm heading to client meetings in that part of the city. The structure looks smaller somehow, less imposing than it did when I worked there. Through the conference room windows, I can see people in meetings, presentations happening, careers being built and challenged and defended. I think about the women still working inside those walls, wondering if they feel safer now, if the policy changes have created real cultural shifts or just better hidden biases. Change in corporate environments moves slowly, like shifting continental plates. Imperceptible day to day but massive over time. My reflection in those windows shows someone I recognize but hadn't seen in years. A professional woman who commands respect through competence rather than demanding it through fear. Someone who understands that true power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply building something better from the ashes of what tried to destroy you, then helping others do the same. Brooklyn may have tried to write my ending, but I chose when to turn the page, and the new chapter turned out to be the best one yet. If this story of workplace justice had you cheering from your seat, press that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lillian calmly walked to that projector and Brooklyn's face went from smug to horrified in seconds. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss when someone gets the justice they deserve.